Money conversations with adult children aren't really about money. In fact, they're often about fear or expectations or sometimes even unspoken assumptions. Well, today we're going to talk about how to discuss tough topics like inheritance and aging without anxiety. You're listening to Next Chapter Living, planning your retirement story with our host, Steven Sabo. Steven is a financial advisor with Executive Financial Group. You can visit executivefinancialgroup.com to learn more. Steven, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Alyssa. How about yourself?
Doing wonderfully. Now I got to ask, where's the suntan from being in Baja Mar?
Although it may not look, I wore white today so that it would make it pop just a little bit more because typically this is the color of my skin.
I'm squinting. I'm looking.
But no, yes, we were just in the Bahamas, Baja Mar, like you said, and it was absolutely fabulous. We had a wonderful time. And I know we were talking off air a little bit about the weather here in Butler was looking beautiful when we left. And then whenever we got into the Bahamas, it showed rain all week. So luckily that was not the case. The rain held off and it was sunshine the whole week. It was gorgeous and hot, very hot, but beautiful. And the resort was amazing. So
love to hear it. And that's one of those situations you're very glad that the weatherman was wrong.
I know. Well, it was showing like 85% and it was, thunder and things like that. So I thought, great, we're going to be stuck in the room all week. But there was a casino.
The Bahamas.
Yeah, right. There was a casino in the resort. So that could have been, there was potential for disaster.
Sure.
To put it that way, if we were reined in.
Well, you didn't come back with a sunburn and you didn't come back with gambling debt. So I guess it's a win, right?
Yes, that is correct. Yep.
Well, today we're talking about, we're coming up on Father's Day, and I thought this would make for a great conversation because you sort of have a unique perspective in that you are obviously a son, but you work with your dad, and you're both in the financial industry. So I wanted to dive into what I think for some people can be an awkward or uncomfortable conversation, and that's the father-son or father-daughter dynamic of, I need to have some of these important financial conversations with you. You obviously see it with your clients, but you're living it simultaneously. What are the money conversations parents should be having with their kids?
Yeah, this is a great topic. I mean, there's and we've seen all the situations, being in the business as long as we have, and it can be awkward. It can be tricky, right? Even with my own father and everything like that, nothing's ever been awkward. We've been able to have those conversations, from when we were younger and wanting things and kind of learning the value of money when you're younger and how much it takes in order to buy that thing that you want, that shiny item, the new pair of shoes, whatever it is. I think that teaching your children from a young age that money that doesn't just grow on trees and that you got to work hard for it. And, sometimes what you may look at as a sacrifice isn't really a sacrifice. It's planning for your future. And, starting young, my dad was always good at that. We grew up and certainly we had the stuff that we wanted, but it was always like, okay, well, if you want this, you're going to have to put in some work for it, right? So when you're younger and you don't have a job, I was pulling weeds and spreading mulch at their house. And so, I think that's important to teach your children. And then, as you grow and get older, I start to realize that, wow, he was saying, be careful or don't ruin this or don't ruin that because things are expensive and having to replace it is tough. But then as you kind of get into it, in the later stages, maybe when your parents are getting older and things like that, it's important to have those conversations about what exactly do mom and dad have or what's going to be the plan. And, again, these conversations are going to look different for every family. The dynamics in the family are really going to determine what type of conversations people are having. And, I say that just because we've seen it all, right? Some families get along. Some families do not. Some have one child that they don't want to tell anything, but the other ones are okay. And, so things can get awkward. And I think just being kind of open and honest about most of it is the most important thing. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. And you get into a situation where somebody doesn't know something and they're finding it out for the first time and it can be a little bit awkward. But I think that sitting down with your children, we encourage our clients, who have the types of relationships with their children where they want to tell them these things to get them involved at a certain point in their lives. Maybe they don't want to tell them how much they have, but they need to know that, okay, mom and dad have a plan in place
Sure.
for this, and this, because that's important. Typically what causes a lot of fees and things like that after somebody passes is not having a plan and not knowing where anything is. And so, I think that bringing your children into it and having those conversations is important.
I think parents underestimate the role that they play in teaching financial responsibility. Some of the habits that you start when your kids are younger carry all the way up through. If you've taught them to, whether it's tithe or save 10% of their allowance or birthday money or whatever it is, you're instilling sort of these routines that will then become the habits that they have as adults. Obviously, when you become an adult, you can't go back and give your kids perspective that, maybe you didn't have those conversations when they were 6, 7, 10 years old, whatever. But there are still lessons that you can pass along to your children, even as an adult. And sometimes it can be awkward, right? Parents, sometimes they're ashamed. Maybe they don't feel like they have as much that they want to pass on to their kids. Or maybe they've made some bad money choices that they don't want their kids to know. What lessons do you encourage? Openness? Do you encourage being authentic and truthful about, hey, I made a mistake, but I want you to learn from it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, whenever, kids are younger, in my opinion, there isn't enough talk about money and responsibility and things like that, say in high school, right? You get out of high school, and if you're going to go on to college, and now you're on your own, and if your parents aren't providing you money, then you have to figure it out. And so, those lessons are very important. And I do think it is important, and we've had conversations with clients, right? Maybe their children are in a better position than the parents, right? And so if that's the case, I do think that people should be open and honest and say, hey, look, here's what I would do differently. And, a lot of the times we have parents that will say that, right? Make sure you're saving, make sure you're doing this. And as much as we say that we aren't like our parents, a lot of the times we find that our clients' children are similar to them. So if the parents were savers, right? Some of our clients, our best clients, are people that they didn't make a whole ton of money in their career, but they saved. And then we find that their children are like that. So they have instilled some of that in them. And then there are other people, that will say, hey, look, I'm not going to have a whole lot, or I want to make sure that I don't burden them with something as we get older. And, my dad jokes about it all the time. He says, hey, if I've done everything right, the last check that I write will bounce. And you kids, and again, he jokes about it and stuff like that, but he helped us a lot, as we were kids, helped us go through college, weddings. He has 4 children, 3 daughters. So gets expensive. And, so everybody's situation is going to look a little bit different. I think, nowadays people are looking at, there's still a fair amount of people that want to leave something to their children, but they're also looking at it like, well, we want to enjoy ourselves, and typically there's going to be something left, right? Maybe it's not going to be $1 million, but they're going to be passing on something. And so, but I do think it's very important to have that conversation and be open and honest about, hey, did we make a mistake? Or, here's maybe what you should look at. But, at the end of the day, adults, are going to do what they want to do. And so sometimes, we have situations where the parent might be telling their children to do something, and it's just, they have gone a different direction. I'm thinking of somebody in particular, and the dad, the older gentleman who's a client, is always worried about, the type of money that their kids are spending and their grandkids, and, doing stuff like that. And so it can be awkward. It is a bit of, almost like a therapy session, because you certainly don't want to offend anybody or anything like that. But, you just want to try and give the best information that you can to help, whatever the situation is. But, everybody's different. Some people don't want their children involved. Some want them involved, or, maybe one is kind of an outcast, or they know that, I'm not going to put this person in charge of something because they don't have their own, house in order. We do our best to kind of navigate that without offending anybody and saying, hey, look, maybe you should think about this or this person, isn't the greatest with money. We've helped them out of debt, and they're back in it. So you got to be careful with that. But I do think it's very important, especially, starting young. I tell my clients that have younger children all the time to have those conversations. Or, hey, look, if you want me to talk to your kids about stuff, I enjoy trying to teach people about saving money, even if it's, put $25 away a month or a week or whatever, as early as you can. Whenever you get that first job, start saving. It's important. We're fortunate enough that a lot of our clients are, they have that type of mind frame towards their kids. And so the conversations get different as people get older. Unfortunately, money can bring fighting into families. And so that can be awkward, second marriages, kids from different marriages, who's going to leave what. Maybe mom had more money than dad had, but, they want everybody to be the same. But mom is like, these technically aren't my children. I love them, all that stuff. So, you do your best to listen and hear their concerns. You can't force people to do anything.
I think you mentioned something that I know is hard as a parent, and that's the idea of setting financial boundaries. You mentioned your dad. He's paid for, he's got 3 girls. He's paid his fair share. He's done weddings. He's done college. And now he's setting the financial boundary of saying, look, this is where the gravy train stops and you guys have to be on your own. But I know some parents struggle with that for various reasons. Some of it is the economic times that we're living in. You're seeing more and more grandparent generations having to help even their children and their grandchildren, whether it's with college or just daily living expenses, that down payment on a home, things like that, because things are more and more expensive. But you don't want them to do it at the risk of sabotaging their own retirement. Is that a conversation that you have to have sometimes that, hey, look, we know you want to help, but there's no loan for retirement?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's we've dealt with that situation exactly. We have some clients and they got a settlement of money that, the husband was unfortunately had a medical malpractice situation and he's in a wheelchair. And, they ended up with a substantial amount of money from that. And we said, hey, look, we're going to set these things up. You're going to be able to retire. He no longer wanted to work. His wife was going to continue to work, but he couldn't really anymore. He's in a wheelchair. And, so we set some things up and they have children and they bought their children houses with cash and their kids didn't have jobs and they had boyfriends that were living with them, and children, and they're continuing to pay not only their bills, but then the children's bills of the house. And then, it got to a point where they were coming to us and saying, what do we do? And we kept trying to tell them politely, hey, you can do what you want, but you got to get to a point where you tell your kids, like, they're going to have to take care of this because, she wanted to retire at a certain age and it's not going to happen now. Unfortunately, they've spent a fair amount of money and you can't stop people from doing it. It's their own money. All you can do is say, hey, we don't recommend that. It's difficult. We had to have those conversations and unfortunately it has derailed their plans a little bit. And, again, I don't have any children of my own. So, but I do know that, people love their children unconditionally and, even whenever they're doing things that you don't want them to be doing, but there has to come a point where you say, hey, look, we can't sacrifice our living situation to continue to take care of you. At some point or another, you're going to have to step up and do something. And it's a tough conversation to have, but in my opinion, it's my job to tell them those things. They may not follow it. They may not agree with me, but I'm not coming from a point of like, I could care less about what the relationship that you have with your children. I'm not trying to say that they're bad and you should, kick them out or something like that. But I'm trying to tell you from a numbers perspective, here's what we did for you. And it's not going to work if you're going to continue to give them money and pay for all these things. You're going to end up derailing the plan that we set up. And so, again, you can only do so much and you can only tell people things so many times. And it is a big part of, what we deal with. And I think it's important to have those conversations with people, whether they want to hear it or not.
One of the other facets of it, obviously you deal with more the financial side, but I always have to throw it in there when we have this conversation, I think because I've lived it as an only child, but included in these types of conversations needs to be the talk about long-term care and medical wishes. I think I've said it previously on a show that was the greatest gift that my mom gave to me in her cancer diagnosis, is that she knew what she did and didn't want to endure from a medical standpoint. And that was written out. So in the heat of the battle and in the hard times of her being sick, I could just defer to that. I wasn't trying to navigate those really complicated and heavy decisions by myself because she wasn't in a place to weigh in on it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's a big concern for a lot of people and a lot of the children, of our older clients. They're worried about, are mom and dad okay? Do they have the assets if they need to go into a home? I think that most people would like to take care of their parents as they age, but unfortunately that's not always the case. Maybe it's a little bit difficult. They have their own lives. They have a lot of things going on. And so, knowing that mom and dad have something in place is a big thing. And, we try and deal with that early on in the planning process to figure it out and, share that stuff with your children. Hey, if you don't want something medically done or if you want something a certain way, that they need to know that, right? And so legal documents are part of it. We help people get that into place so that they know, what to do. But it can be tricky too. Sometimes it's like, hey, mom and dad may not want to go somewhere, a care facility, but that's the only option. And so, making sure that they, that their children are okay with it and, that they can afford it and everything. Sometimes you run into situations where it's like, mom and dad can't afford that. So they're going to have to come and live with you or they're going to have to. And, we navigate it as things come. Sometimes you can do all the planning in the world, but it's not going to necessarily, life doesn't go how you have things planned out on paper, right?
Right.
You just have to be able to kind of roll with the punches and make sure that, you've done your job to take care of everything that you can and get them to share with their kids what they want and what they can do and can't do and, all those things.
Well, ultimately, as we've heard, the healthiest money conversation with your adult children isn't just a one-time conversation. It's ongoing, trust-building conversations, dialogues that evolve, as you said, over time. But if you're looking for somebody to maybe help navigate those conversations or get the ball rolling, you can reach out to Steven and the team at Executive Financial Group by visiting executivefinancialgroup.com, or you can give them a call at 724-283-2806. Or, maybe you can subtly just slide this podcast episode over in their direction. Hey,
That's
mom
right.
and dad, maybe it's time for us to have a conversation.
Yeah, please do. I mean, it's never too early to have that conversation, and you don't want to be having it whenever after something happens where you may not be able to resolve or fix whatever problem it is that you're facing. So certainly give us a call. We'd love to sit down. I've been through a million awkward meetings, so it's nothing that's going to be a surprise to me. I kind of look at it as a challenge to, kind of bring people together, right? So please give us a call, go to our website, listen to the podcast. We'd love to help.
Again, that website is executivefinancialgroup.com. You can also follow along on YouTube or Facebook. And as always, we are so grateful that you took time out of your day to spend it with us. And we hope you'll come back again soon.
The opinions expressed by Steven Sabo and guests on this podcast are their own and do not reflect the opinions of this podcast station. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Past performance cannot be used as an indicator to determine future results. Any strategies mentioned may not be suitable for everyone. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. Before acting on any information mentioned, please consult with a qualified tax or investment advisor to determine if it is suitable for your specific situation. This program is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information with regard to subject covered. Investment advisory services offered through Virtue Capital Management, LLC, VCM, a registered investment advisor. VCM and Executive Financial Group are independent of each other. Pennsylvania Insurance License number 670429. Any guarantees mentioned are backed by the financial strength and claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company and may be subject to caps, restrictions, fees, and surrender charges as described in the annuity contract. Steven Sabo and/or Executive Financial Group are not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any other government agency.